Welcome to the executive branch. Today, we're going to be examining the cabinet. Now, most people don't really think that the cabinet has a whole lot to do with their daily lives. Some were to think about where exactly the government does intervene. We are a free and open Republican system. However, the executive cabinet has more to do than you might actually believe. Matter of fact, if we were to take our morning routines, we might shut off the alarm on our phone. We might take a shower, and we might get dressed. Open the refrigerator, find ourselves some breakfast, or whatever looks mostly edible to still eat. Start our car, drive to school along our beautiful roads and highways, and then go to class. Now, none of these things seem like the government is taking a huge part in, but in fact, the government is involved in every single one of these 8 aspects of our morning routines. Matter of fact, when we break down which regulatory agencies oversees these daily activities, the list is very large. The cell phone that we use is immediately regulated by the Federal Communications Commissions. The Department of Energy is also involved in the charging of your cell phone itself, as well as the electronic transmissions that allow it to actually receive signals, including the atomic clock, which our alarm runs on. The Department of Interior and Department of Energy both take a part in just even taking a shower, from how it is heated and the materials that are used, as well as the clean water itself. More than likely, the clothes that you had did not come from this country. So therefore, the Department of State would have had to be involved in order to get it here. The Department of Commerce would have also been involved in order to get it from the shores into the local stores, as well as making sure that the stores were properly regulated. The Department of Labor would have been in charge of the people who actually sold you those clothes, and even the Department of Agriculture, for anything locally grown, would have actually been regulating all cotton. The Department of Energy, Commerce, and Transportation would have been involved in getting the fridge into your house, as well as maintaining the regulations for how it was used to make sure none of the food would turn toxic. And even right down to your breakfast, the Health and Human Services Department, as well as the Department of Agriculture, would have been directly involved in making sure that the food that you have is not only safe, but also relatively healthy for you. So, let's go ahead and take a look at the President's Cabinet. Wait, that is not the President's Cabinet. That's not the President's Cabinet either. Alright, this is the President's Cabinet. This group of people is the immediate collaborators and advisors for the President of the United States. They also maintain a variety of different attitudes and areas for which is vital to the daily operations of the government and, truthfully, our daily operations as well. Before we can get to who all these people are, we need to understand something about the government itself. The basic governmental structure of the bureaucracy is very pyramidal in its scheme. From the President and Vice President, we see a general breakdown. The parent agencies answer directly to the President. These are the 15 advisors that we just looked at. Beneath them are subordinate agencies. These are highly specialized fields which directly involve our daily lives. Now, one example of this is a parent agency may have been the Department of Interior, whom I used to work for. My subordinate agency was the Bureau of Reclamation. Now, beneath them are child agencies, which are highly specialized fields. For example, when I was working for the Department of Interior, I was working directly for the Bureau of Reclamation's Water Treatment Engineering and Research Group, and we had developed desalination and water treatment technologies to be transferred all the way across the world. So even though I was at what's known as street-stride administration, I still worked for a very large agency and technically was only 5 people away from the President himself. Now, everything below this level of the parent agencies is known directly as the bureaucracy. Now, the cabinet is not just the original 15 members of the heads of the department. It includes 7 additional members. First of all, it also includes the vice president himself. As mentioned in the Constitution, the vice president has actually very little authority outside of the president. Matter of fact, he's only supposed to preside over the Senate and wait for the president to kick it. However, in modern day, the vice president holds a more vital role as the government's power begins to expand. Now, we also see a variety of other heads that are included as well, such as the Environmental Protection Agency, the Office of Management and Budget, which does assist the President in developing and implementing the budget, the U.S. Trade Representatives Council, the Council of Economic Advisors, which helps give kind of a pulse for what the economy is doing at any given time, the U.S. Ambassadors to the United Nations, as well as the White House Chief of Staff. And as we know, nothing goes through the White House unless it goes through the Chief of Staff first. Included into this also are what's known as independent or interdependent agencies. These agencies have lower responsibilities and typically perform services rather than regulatory functions. Some of these might include the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, also known as NASA. Also is the Environmental Protection Agency, which encourages environmental protection and safety across the United States. Now, interdependent regulatory commissions are different than an agency. These are created by Congress to exist outside of all major departments. Traditionally, these regulate specific economic activities. Now, groups like this could include the National Labor Relations Board, which gets employers and employees, particularly labor unions, in the same place to make sure that things don't end up getting caught up and these industries are able to continue functioning. The Federal Communications Commission, which helps regulate all the broadcasts over the nationally owned airwaves. The Securities and Exchange Commission, which regulates the stock market as well as makes sure that the market won't crash once again and ensures that safe practices and fair practices are being maintained. And the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which makes sure that everything from the size of the desks to the size of the doorways are safe for everyday use. Now, government corporations are also a very important part of the United States government. Much like commissions, these agencies were established predominantly during the New Deal time period in order to make sure that big businesses couldn't get too big, or they were providing services that most big businesses weren't able to do. Two examples of this would be the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which insures all banks' deposits up to $250,000. So if you put your money in, you're guaranteed that your money's still going to be there, at least up until $250,000. And the Tennessee Valley Authority, which manages the power grids for the entire South. Now, where this used to just be hydroelectric power, this is now actually expanded to nuclear, hydroelectric, electric, and all sorts of different power that it traditionally wasn't. Today, this produces almost $11.56 billion in revenue annually for the United States government. Now, when we take a look at the Executive Cabinet itself, as you already know, the Executive Cabinet are the major administrative units with the responsibility for a broad area of government operations. The departmental status usually indicates a permanent national interest in particular of government function. Now, overall, these are the heads of 60% of the total workforce. Each one of these 15 individuals are known as secretaries, and these secretaries answer directly to the president and do require senatorial approval because they do have a significant amount of power. Now, the reason why they called them secretaries rather than ministers like most other countries is they wanted to make sure that they were able to keep it secular without any religious connotation. The only exception to the secretary rule would be the Department of Justice head, which is known directly as the Attorney General. Now, I believe that it is just about time to introduce you to the major significant groups. So, ladies and gentlemen, might I introduce you to the Executive Cabinet. Ladies and gentlemen, the Department of Homeland Security. Established after the 9/11 attacks, this condensed much of the government down into one singular agency, which would ensure our national security. Now, what I mean by that is U.S. Secret Service originally actually were under Treasury. Customs and Immigration Enforcement used to be under Department of Commerce. Border Patrol used to be under the Department of Interior, Coast Guard used to be under the Army, and Transportation and Safety Administration used to be under the Department of Transportation. We also get the Veterans Affairs Office, which helps all veterans getting back from the battlefields reintegrate into society. The Department of Education helps design the curriculum for our everyday lives, including the curriculum which you're being taught right now. The Department of Energy is concerned with energy and safety handling, especially those with nuclear energies. The Department of Transportation sees everything from air, sea, and water transportation regulation, including the Federal Aviation Administration, much like the one here in Longmont, as well as the National Highway Safety Administration, which makes sure that your car is appropriate before you head out on the road. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development helps people get into houses, sometimes when they may not be able to afford them. The idea behind it is that a safe and stable community is a prosperous one. The Department of Health and Human Services also assists in a variety of health-related issues, including the Center for Disease Control, the Food and Drug Administration, as well as the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. The Department of Labor looks at all occupational safety issues, wages, hour standards, and unemployment issues. The Department of Commerce regulates all business actions inside the United States. Now, oddly enough, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, as well as the National Weather Service, fall under the Department of Commerce. It's relatively simple to think about. If there's bad weather, you're not getting your stuff. The United States Department of Agriculture has a variety of duties, everything ranging from the Food Safety and Inspection Service all the way through to the U.S. Forest Service. The Department of Interior also covers the basic use of land management and resources inside the United States. My old employer would also include the Bureau of Reclamation, the Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the U.S. Geological Survey. Now, the Attorney General is part of and head of the Department of Justice. This is the enforcement aspect of the United States government, which includes the U.S. Marshals Service, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and the drug enforcement agencies. The Department of Defense, well, basically, it handles all of our defense issues. They have the largest budget, as well as they are the largest employer, having almost 3.2 million servicemen and civilians. Now, this includes the Departments of Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and the National Security Agency. The Department of Treasury does exactly that. It collects all federal taxes through the Internal Revenue Services and manages the United States government debt instruments. And finally, we get the Department of State. They deal principally with all foreign affairs issues. So they might include also working and making sure that your passports are up to date, as well as possibly bailing you out of an Iranian prison should you get caught for espionage. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is what a normal cabinet meeting looks like. Cozy. All right, now comes your assignment. Much like when a person is originally elected or a president is already sitting, I would like for you to develop your own personal cabinet. What you will need for this is you will be developing your own advisory team for the people, places, and things that exist in your life. You will need top 12 secretaries or advisors who will be listed by name as well as by department. You will also be required to give a one-sentence explanation on why you chose the secretary for that position. Now, in addition to these 12, you will need 2 independent agencies, commissions, and or corporations, and 1 vice president. But also don't forget, you'll have a chair for yourself. Now, to give you a quick example, here was mine. I put myself as the president of my cabinet. My wife, whom I get all my money from, is the Secretary of Treasury. My daughter, Abby, who never stops moving, is my Secretary of Energy. Mr. Olson, my employer, easy pick for the Secretary of Labor. My brother, Chris, is the Secretary of Transportation, as he's a mechanic who always tells me what I'm doing wrong with my car. My dog, Persephone, is my Secretary of Homeland Security, as she barks and pees anytime someone comes close to my house. No one in my house gives me more opportunity to find out how I'm going to cut myself, fall off ladders, or do something dangerous than my mother-in-law, Patricia, who is my advisor for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. My landscaping neighbor, Troy, the neighbor, is my Secretary of Interior, as he continually tells me what I'm doing right and wrong in my yard, and why my trees keep losing all their leaves. Dr. Martyr would be my Secretary of Education, as any time that I am having a problem with my day or a classroom management issue, he is my personal doctor. My father would be the Secretary of Commerce, Mr. Sean Hernan, as he helps me with all business and tax-related issues. My mother, who can grow virtually anything, and does, would be my Secretary of Agriculture, while my daughter Eleanor would be the advisor of National Endowments for the Arts and Sciences, as she is absolutely infatuated with STEM classes as well as the arts. And if I ever needed to hide another body, I would call my best friend Patrick to come help me. So, I hope this was helpful for you. Schoology dates for when this is due will be posted. And if you have any questions, always feel free to come see me.